if our conversation runs dry after 30 minutes, that's a sad thing for the state of our friendship, my friend. Wait a second. Stop right there. Hold the presses. What is that thing in your hand?
My giant mug. I know it's not. It's not as nice as your mug. Actually, before we get started, I should go fill up.
Do you need to fill up? I can wait. I can cut right here.
So we have a full fill cut. We already started?
Oh, we've been going, man.
Oh, I had no idea.
We ease into it. We ease into it. You didn't even notice. In the intermission today, future me, the only person watching this, I got stuck in an elevator, and it was not as stressful as it's supposed to be. It was actually very interesting. We were only stuck for about 20 minutes, so it was not a big thing. I got stuck in an elevator today, Kevin.
Oh, did you?
Mm-hmm.
That's a fun experience.
For the first time in my life. You're supposed to be stressful, right? Only about 20 or 30 minutes.
Yeah, that's not.
But the fire department did have to break us out.
Oh.
So that was great.
Is that your... No, because you're in a 2-story.
No, I'm in a 5-story.
Oh, you're in a 5-story. Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but we were on the ground floor.
Complex?
The ground floor in the apartment, yeah. We were underground.
You're using the elevator to go up to your 5th floor.
Well,
Can't take the stairs.
No, it's not like that, Kevin. It's not like that at all. The stairs. The stairs are
You're getting your exercise through this conversation, which is like hiking.
Right, exactly. I'm burning my mental calories. No, right. Because it's like this. When you take the trash down, and then you want to leave. So you take the trash down, and the elevator door, when it goes to the ground floor, opens and closes within 5 seconds. It's a very fast open and close. I don't know if it's
New York.
The algorithms or what, but you have to sprint. So that's at least 2 calories. And if the stairs are really far away, so it's kind of ridiculous to go to the stairs. So the challenge is to get to the trash, throw it, and then come back before the door closes, which is amazing if you can even get your arm in there,
Right.
So
yeah, that would not be a good idea.
What's that? Getting your arm in the...
Yeah.
Well, no, but isn't that what they're designed for? That's what they're designed for. You're supposed to get your arm in there.
I know, but I think it was in New York. There was a news story recently where someone got their leg stuck. And not to get too gruesome on your podcast here,
please, let's hear it. Let's hear all the details.
I don't think it ended well. You have to pull up the news story, but yeah, they got their legs stuck. The doors closed. I think it was the person's leg. I don't think it was their arm. And the elevator went up, and the person stayed. And unfortunately,
no more leg.
But no, they bled out. Unfortunately,
they died through their leg.
Yeah, I think so. I think it was in New York. And it was a couple years ago, a year or two ago.
Whoa!
I'm not going to pull it up now. You can.
That's crazy.
Yeah, I remember seeing that.
Well, it's supposed to be that they have the little sensitive flap there. Yeah. Now I have to rethink.
Yeah, you got to be a little careful, especially for someone like you that's hypochondriac. You really don't want to.
I'm not that hypochondriac anymore.
About elevators.
I think I got it out of my system. I'm hypochondriac about escalators. I don't want to get sucked in.
Right. Yeah.
If your shoelaces gets in there, it'll spaghettify you before you can count to 3. You'll turn into little shreds. I always imagine a big pile of meat underground under an escalator.
That happened in China.
Are you serious? Nice.
Yeah. So there was
You're full of building transportation stories.
But there was so at the very top of an escalator, you still have that metal surface, which is basically where you step off of the moving stair, and then underneath that's where it circles back around, right?
Of course.
So that platform, for some reason, as soon as someone stepped on it, it fell through. And so it was a woman with her child, and they got off the escalator, and as soon as they stepped, it gave way. And the mother was able to throw the child out before going in.
And she got wood chipped. I mean, she got ground up in the escalator.
Yes, to put it nicely, yes. Yeah.
That's insane.
That was big news back in China.
But my question would be, how could an escalator be that powerful? it shouldn't be that powerful. It should be, because I've been able to stop an escalator before just by wedging. I wanted to see if I could do it. You know how the escalator steps go like this? They lean forward.
Yeah.
So I thought, I wonder if I really jam my foot into the crack between the step and the incline of the next step, the vertical, if I could really wedge it in there, if it'll stop the escalator. Just out of curiosity. It was very impulsive. The social deviant in me came out, and it worked.
Where were you doing that?
I think it was a shopping center.
In America or in China?
In China.
Oh, okay.
I think it was in China, yeah. It was one of those ones that speed up when you get close to them.
Oh, right. So maybe one of the ones that's a little higher quality, a little nicer. It's got sort of safety procedures in place. I don't remember what happened with that escalator, but obviously there was a lot of human error going on. That entire little pane of metal or whatever it is just gave way.
So it must have been somebody doing maintenance on it, working on it, and they didn't seal it correctly.
They didn't seal it or something. Yeah,
that's horrific. That's a nightmare. So we've heard right at the start of this podcast. So let's start again. All right. Hey, Kevin, welcome to the podcast, everyone. Kevin has a full giant cup of what are you drinking today, Kevin?
I'm drinking water.
And we have the same facial hair.
Yeah.
When did you go with the
I started probably around Christmas of last year, and I had tried to grow it a little longer and fuller, but I don't have the facial hair growth to achieve a look like that. So
neither do I.
We're nice and trim. Yep. So nice and trim.
I got to keep it short as well, because this I get nothing here.
Yep.
This stops, and then here it's just pathetic. I wish I could, have hair here, but I just don't. It comes in like
I get some here, so I might try and go for the full sort of, 5 millimeter stubbly beard.
I think you could pull it off, Kevin, if you have the density.
Right. That's the key.
That's the key, because I don't have the density here. I can do it just a very thin strip here, but there's no density here, so I can't pull it off.
Yeah, I found with this there was zero density, but after 6 months, it's filled in. Just grows really slowly.
Right. Yeah. It looks very cool.
Well, thank you. You got to butter me up before you start asking all the hard questions.
Well, so I think the best way for us to get started is to kind of pick up where we left off. We've been sort of going back and forth on recently in WeChat is Star Wars, but in particular the latest Star Wars film. And
well, not the latest. It's the latest main series film.
Right.
Sorry. The latest Star Wars film would be Hope. Did you see that?
Hope?
Isn't it called... no, it's not called Hope.
It's called Solo.
Oh, Solo.
Hope.
Oh, why am I thinking
That's
Hope?
Like a Hallmark.
Hope, Solo.
That's like a Hallmark version of Star Wars.
Yeah.
That would be terrible.
Because we hope it's good.
Yeah.
No, I never saw. Did you see Solo?
There's no hope. No, but my brother watched it, and I think you can probably guess his reaction to it. He doesn't like it. He hates everything. Exactly.
Yeah.
Hello, Gabe.
So main series, Last Jedi.
Right. So is that what it's called? It's called the main series, or is it called the?
What would you call it?
The main. Well, yeah, I guess you have to. You can't call it the main trilogy because it's several trilogies.
Right.
All right. I was gonna say canon, but that would be for the whole.
Right, because the way it's set up now is you have sort of the films, which are the canon, and then all of the books that were written, which are now considered legends. And so a lot of things that happen in the books, they're now going back and saying, oh, that never happens. That's just a legend. Because they're changing. Because obviously there were books written about what happened after the destruction of the second Death Star, Luke and Leia and Han, their sort of future and their children. And
right, the whole Grand Admiral Thrawn series, right, that series of books, it's quite a famous series. So
yes.
I think that's probably the best place to start. I think a lot of fans were hoping that they would go in the direction of sort of embracing the expansion universe, embracing the novels that you couldn't deny were canon. Actually they were.
Right, at that time, yes.
They were, right? And George Lucas acknowledged them as canon. And now they're sort of saying, there's too much content out there. We can't say whether it is or isn't, but if it's been covered by a film, then now the film is canon.
Right, yeah. Well, now that it's Disney, they're going back and making changes. So
okay, so but that's it's interesting to me how something becomes canon and how it's counted and how it isn't, right? It seems like, and it also seems like a lot of authority to give to a filmmaker. Why is it that a film has to be canon, and that a single producer of the film gets to decide what is and isn't, even though maybe a book has been around for 20 or 30 years? Well, 20 years, let's say.
I think it's because Star Wars started in film. It originally was the trilogy, and that is what people see as being the main Star Wars.
Right.
The amount of fans that see movies is going to be much greater than the individuals that go out and seek the books, the novels, the expanded universe. And so they want to make sure that what's happening here, well, this is what you're seeing. This is the true story. And I think years past, maybe they weren't, I never thought I would see 7, 8, 9. Of the trilogy.
Why did you think you never would? Because I had the same feeling, like, oh, it's obviously that's never going to happen. And for some reason, I just had that feeling that it wasn't going to happen.
Yeah, I never felt, there wasn't news of it happening, and then after 1, 2, and 3, it was very mixed reviews, and you sort of felt, maybe they're not going to continue and make the newer films. And then you're thinking, if that's a continuation of the original story,
right,
well, they're not going to get Luke and Han and Leia, the actors, Mark Hamill and all them, to come back, especially even when they were creating, even when it was purchased by Disney and they were creating 7, 8, 9, Harrison Ford the whole time was saying, no, I'm never going to do it. I'm never going to do another Star Wars. I'm done.
Because he didn't want to go back to what made him, or he was worried about typecasting? I mean, he's had enough roles.
I don't think he's worried about typecasting.
I hope not. What is he worried about then?
I don't think he really likes the role. I don't think he likes Han Solo as much. And I know there have been stories that he had spoilers. He had requested to die in the original trilogy. He felt that would be a good ending to his character. So right. I believe it was in Return of the Jedi that he really wanted his character to perish, and instead of being
frozen in carbonite.
No. Instead of just going on. Well, yeah, that might have been the scene where he originally wanted to die.
Yeah. Yeah. So he knew he wanted to die way back then.
Right.
And so when they brought him back, he wrote that into his contract. I must die.
Yes. Yeah.
That's interesting. Do you think that he died in the right way?
Yeah, I'm okay with his death.
Yeah.
I'm okay with his death. Harrison Ford wanted to die, so I'm okay. I'm happy that he came back and did one more film, that nostalgic feel. Him and Chewie on the Millennium Falcon, we're home, and it's so nice to see him again. And the way he died wasn't a way that you would, I don't think, get too angry. You can see, sort of the father's response to go out and sort of meet the son and try and bring him back to the light side. And even though he knows there's no chance of it ever happening, but he can't kill his own son, right?
Right.
So I'm sort of okay with the way it went.
The only issue that I had, and I was kind of okay with that too, I think it kind of makes sense to have that confrontation because Kylo needs to sort of solidify his path, right? Because he's wavering at that point, and he needs to solidify his darkness. Basically, that's
right.
That's why he does it, right? The only thing that made me not really like that scene as much was Chewbacca's reaction. I think that they didn't really focus on the fact that there's Chewbacca, who's his lifelong friend. Well, a very long time they've been friends,
right,
and together. And Chewbacca is there and witnesses it, but they don't focus on that part of it at all. They focus more on the drama of, I think Rey's there, right? They focus on that dramatic element. But I mean, if you're going to focus on something, you got to see Chewie devastated that his best friend has just been stabbed right through the chest by his son, and then after it, Chewie's just sort of like, I'm along for the ride now, and he's now Rey's best pal, and they're flying around.
Him up the spellcaster.
I mean, yeah, it's ridiculous, and that part didn't have emotional impact as much as it could have. They could have really made that scene extremely powerful, and it was kind of powerful-ish. but they didn't push the buttons that they could have.
Right. Yeah, and it's similar in Empire Strikes Back, where Han is frozen in carbonite, and you don't know, his eventual fate, and that sort of Chewie yell once he's finally frozen. It's a very dramatic. Chewie says a lot.
Right. It's chilling, right? That you get the full impact. Like, my best friend, I don't know where he's going to go. I don't know if he's alive or dead when they do it, and that chilling Chewie growl of despair.
Yeah.
I
would agree with
powerful
you.
moment.
I think, but what I think they're trying to do is use the original characters to promote the new blood. So why would they focus on Rey in that instance? She doesn't know Han very well. They don't have that much of a relationship yet, and she's devastated by his loss. But
yeah, who cares?
They're trying to make the old fans invest in new heroes. So they have to build her up while phasing out the original characters.
Well, then have Chewbacca stand right behind Han Solo, and then the sword gets both of them, and they both fall off together in separate directions, or holding hands, or whatever you want to do.
That would be good.
Two for the price of one.
So I think that is one of the issues that lies at the heart of all the problems that the new trilogy is seeing. Because it is a continuation of sort of the Skywalker saga, which is, what we've had in 4, 5, 6, and in some extent in 1, 2, and 3, where we know Anakin is actually Luke's and Leia's father. So with this now, it's a continuation, but the main focus of the story is no longer on Luke, Leia, Han, and Chewie.
Yep.
We're trying to shift the focus to an entirely new cast of characters that up until that point have no connection with our main series characters, except for Kylo Ren, Ben Solo. So I think that leaves them in a very difficult position where they're trying to still show us the original characters but not focus on them. So you're losing something in that trade-off.
I think you said it perfectly. I think that says it. It's sort of a middle ground, a sort of no man's land where you want to, and and what you're used to, you want to follow this, not a dynasty story, but you want to follow this single line of people because that's fundamentally what everything in Star Wars centers around. And even those extended universe books have to sometimes thread themselves into, even if it's a reference, they have to thread themselves into that sort of core Star Wars family line. They have to somehow be connected. Otherwise, people are going to maybe feel it's not very Star Wars. It's almost like that is one of the things that identifies something as Star Wars for whatever reason. Sure.
Well,
and I haven't really seen anything that doesn't make at least some reference to it or isn't connected with it in some way. Besides maybe Knights of the Old Republic, the video game, which can't because it's thousands of years before.
It, right.
Yeah, but that is okay because it's so far removed. It's not possible. But I think because they weren't able to make a clear decision about what they were really trying to go for, that they're almost crippled. I think that people don't like the new characters enough, and I think that they didn't give the old characters enough to do so that the people who were previous Star Wars fans would really be invested.
Sure. I agree with that statement. I think that you do have the issue of using the old characters to introduce the new ones, and then you're trying to fade out the old ones, right? As you said, a bait and switch. And we did that with Han in the first of the new trilogy. We've now done it with Luke in the second, and obviously we'll be doing it with Leia in the third. They're slowly being phased out, sort of the main series characters, and going in a way that maybe we don't want to see them go.
And but I think then so that sort of brings it to the eighth movie, and the moment in the film when we find out that she's nobody and she's not related to anybody special, right? if you really want to bring all of the diehard Star Wars fans on board and get them invested in someone who's one of the new people, what you should do is make that protagonist, that main character, part of that family, part of that dynasty, or whatever you want to call it. Because if you do that, then you have kept that thread that runs through all the films. But if she really is nobody, if she really is just some junk dealer's daughter, and that turns out to be true, I think that they've almost arbitrarily decided to shoot themselves in the face, and they have to rely on just young fans who are enjoying the movies as they are, as new films, having not seen previous Star Wars movies, because I think it's pissed off a lot of fans like myself.
I like how they've shot themselves in the face and not in the foot.
Yeah, it's more
big issue.
It's more dramatic.
So I am one of those young people, I guess, that I'm going to preface this by saying I am a fan of the new films. I have enjoyed both of the new main series films. Although I have not seen The Last Jedi a second time. I only saw it in theaters the once, so I do need to go back and watch it a second time.
I think I've seen it twice.
I have mixed feelings about the Rey lineage. I like, or would like, for her to be a nobody, because I'm kind of tired of the plug that Anakin was born of the Force, right? He was sort of like Jesus in a sense.
Yeah.
And then Luke is the son of Anakin, and you basically have to have this royal Jedi bloodline to be anybody. And I like the idea of giving hope that a nobody, just someone that's born to be Force sensitive and has a good heart and works hard and this and that, can grow up to have this sort of power. And I think that's an interesting twist. Whereas if she ends up being, let's say, Kylo Ren's twin, which I think was sort of the way it worked in some of the Legends books. You had Han and Leia had twins. I don't think their female daughter ended up being a Jedi, but I think she did fight against her twin brother, who ended up becoming a Sith.
So this was in which story?
I do not remember.
Was her name Rey as well?
No. I don't think her name was Rey. You would see this is where it'd be great if you had this podcast with a third person over there Googling.
Yeah, exactly. Kathy,
me back there. Yeah, Kathy.
Can you bring that up on Ask Jeeves?
Yeah. So there's a lot of things, and we've talked about this before with the movie, that a lot of people don't like, that I am sort of a fan of. So one is her being a nobody. Right, I like that idea of her not having this bloodline, just being because it's been built up so much. She's waiting for her parents, and we're like, oh, is it Obi-Wan? Is it Han? And now there's a lot of people saying it's Han, and whoever the other female lead is in his new movie, is she somehow related to Luke?
Ooh, that'd be cool.
Yeah. But nobody is fine. My feeling is that wasn't the big reveal. I think they're going to do something in episode 9. I think they have a problem with twists or reveals in these 3 films, because you have to get away from doing what you've done before, right? We had the big I am your father in episode 5, right? In episode 6, we had your brother and sister. So we don't want to do that all over again. We don't want to have her built up and say, Luke is your father. Oh, or, Kylo Ren is your brother. And
why? Because it's cheap, or because it's repetitive? I
think it's because my feeling is it's repetitive. I think these films.
But you liked episode 7. This is the most repetitive film ever made.
Yeah. So we can talk about that in a second too. So I think that's one of the issues, and I think something else that people have a problem with is Snoke. Right? Snoke was built up as the new villain. All right, who is he? Is he Darth Pelagius, or was he Darth Pelagius's teacher and or pupil? Is he? What did some people say he was? Mace Windu.
I haven't heard that one.
Yeah, I
Ooh,
think
an
some people
elongated
said,
Mace
like,
Windu. Nice.
well, after he fell, he ended up living, and then he turned to the dark side, and this and that. So there's a lot of theories out there about who he is. But everyone is saying it's someone that we already know, right? And then there's going to be a reveal. So the feeling is you're going to build up. You have 3 films. Snoke is the eventual Emperor Palpatine-esque character. You build the 3 films up to the final confrontation in Episode 9.
Right.
But I don't think anyone saw him dying right there in the second of the 3 films.
Right.
And so I really enjoyed that because it's different than the build-up in 4, 5, and 6. So you have this big build-up. We're thinking, okay, we're going to get a reveal about Rey's parents. We're going to get, a reveal about Snoke's identity. He's going to live and he's going to be killed in Episode 9. Rey, you're a nobody. Snoke, you're dead. And that to rather refreshing because it was different than what had been done before.
Okay, so it was definitely... I completely agree that it was a bold move, and I think they were trying to make it a bold move, right? And they wanted to have that shock value, just as you have shock value in Episode 5 when they kept the script secret and they revealed only a few people knew, not even the cast.
Yeah,
most of the cast knew. Darth Vader didn't even know what he was saying. He was saying something else, right? He had other lines. He was saying, I don't know, Obi-Wan is your father, I think, right?
Right.
And
no, I think I killed your father.
I killed your father. Yeah, something boring like that.
Yeah.
I know your father.
He was a good guy. He was a great star pilot.
All right, well, see you later. Yeah, but so I appreciate what they're trying to do. But I think that it worked in Star Wars in the original trilogy because they had under it this deep narrative that is timeless. And, I mean, if you want to talk about repetition, there are so many themes in the original film and even in the prequels that you could map back to lots of other stories throughout history. It really does follow, especially Episode 4 and Episode 5. My 2 favorites. Actually, Episode 5 is my favorite. But you could map those onto other stories throughout history. And there's nothing wrong with that, because what we do when we make stories and we make things that become legends and we make things that become classic and timeless is we reinterpret the things that are starting to maybe fade away in something that was maybe there in another person's time that's beginning to fade away, whether it's an archetype or maybe it's a principle or whatever it is. Then you bring it back to life. You give it new life and new relevance in a modern setting, in a space odyssey, which is what Star Wars was all about. So I really buy into that thing that Star Wars is to me, which is this reinterpretation of classical myth. And because it's a reinterpretation, it has a core that resonates with people, because myths resonate with people. It's almost built into our DNA. This awareness of these archetypes and these ancient stories, they resonate. And I think the reason that we see films as either great or not great or memorable, not memorable, is partially because they follow this structure or don't. And there can be many different forms, but I kind of feel like, so what if there are aspects of these new films that adhere to some of the same types of things as the original trilogy? So what if there is a build up to the Emperor in the third film, or the ninth film? If it's a good story, if it's a story that delivers emotionally and it has, you feel like, a purpose for being, and you get something from it and it sticks with you for days after, so what if you're not shocked by anything, right? Now, I'm not saying that they shouldn't have killed Snoke, because actually I don't really have an issue with that. I just think that doing something for a cheap reason makes something less likely to become a classic. And I'm rooting for Star Wars films to remain classics. I think Rogue One could be a classic. I think it's a great movie. because it does have those things. It does I think it has those elements in the film, and I've seen it probably 3 or 4 times. But I think by making a decision with the intention of just being surprising and sort of rubbing your hands together and saying, all right, this is going to really shock them, that's like releasing putting out a Turbo Man doll, and then the next year it's some other thing. It's passing. It goes away quickly, and it doesn't have that sort of lasting power. That's my issue with it. I think that's where a lot of the plot decisions came from. That's why I have a problem with especially episode 8, because of this feeling of, well, this is going to shock them. Believe me, it's going to shock them. Yeah, okay, I was surprised. I didn't expect that. Do you have anything else? Is that the only thing you have in your tool belt? Have you got any emotional impact, or are you just going to have her suddenly be able to lift up thousands of giant boulders without any training whatsoever? You know what I mean? No impact.
Yeah. So, all right. So, first, I would agree with you that this sort of standard style of storytelling that has endured through, thousands of years, the sort of the classic myth, the story of the hero, it's been played out. We know exactly what needs to happen, right, in order to create a powerful myth that follows a hero. And Star Wars did that. And George Lucas even talks about that's one of the things he looked at when he was creating the Star Wars story.
Right, he read the book A Hero of a Thousand Faces, and then he wrote Star Wars.
Mm-hmm. And I love films like that. I love films that recreate that kind of story, and you get behind the hero and everyone's happy and we see the destruction of I love films like that. But it's already been done in Star Wars. I think that's one of the issues, because you did it already in 4, 5, and 6. So if they were to continue the series 7, 8, and 9 with the main series characters and have it go on in the same progression, I think that would be wonderful. But because 4, 5, and 6 went in this sort of style of this story, if you have the same sort of style moving along in 7, 8, and 9, it's going to feel redundant. So let me ask you a question. Did you like episode 7?
Not particularly. I mean,
why not?
I didn't like it because there were still a lot of unearned plot points. Okay. And it was all very flash bang boom.
Sure.
And the gravity of the terrible thing that finally happened, which is, I guess, the demise of the entire Republic, was introduced only a minute before it happened. So it's like, who cares? So you see the giant gun going, shooting, and then you see the Republic, the Republic or whatever it is exploding over there, and you go, there's a Republic. Okay, so what is it? Oh, I see. There's a first. Oh, I see. There are two different things. But I realize it after it happens. So there's no gravity for me. If they had built up from the beginning of the story, if it had been a very simple story, all right. So these guys are building a giant laser gun on this planet, and the Republic, this new thing, is still a little bit fragile. But we also have a vigilante group over here, and the vigilante group is led by Princess Leia. Princess Layer Cake is the leader.
There's a lot of depth in that character.
She's a baker. And if that had been a very narrow, small story, I wanted episode 7 to be Rey. Is it BB-88 or BB-88?
BB-8.
BB-88 or BB-8? BB-8.
It's just one. It's 1-8. BB-8.
Is it? Is it?
I think so. This I can look up really quick. Let's see. Just Google.
Just put it in Ask Jeeves.
Yeah, BB-8. See, no one is going to take our comments on Star Wars seriously as we keep speaking on the names of characters in films.
If people,
BB-8.
It's a very minor thing, though. I mean, we're talking about the largest scale. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's missing a name. So
I think
what I wanted to say was, I wanted if they had told a very narrow story, the main characters are Han Solo, Kylo Ren, Rey, BB-88, and Leia. There's no Finn, whatever. BB-8, I don't care. I don't care. Okay, there's maybe no Finn, maybe no Poe Dameron, right? Because they're just add-on characters. They don't have to be there. I don't even know why they're there. They're not even in the story.
Right.
They're just like, hey, go do this thing, and then we'll film it, and then we're going to put it in the movie, and it'll be very exciting. Oh, and you're the funny guy. Okay. But they're not integral to the story, really. So leave those two out and have this very narrow story. Make it all take place on one planet. No space travel. They're all inside of a single little base. And Han Solo comes, and there's tension between Leia and him, and there's tension between BB-8 and Rey, and they're talking about the First Order, and they're talking about the Republic and the danger it's in. If everything had happened in one room and there had been no explosions and the movie had cost $100,000, I would have been so happy. But instead, they decided to say, oh, by the way, the stakes are huge, and it's over already. You know what I mean? It wasn't earned.
Yeah. So I think a lot of people, one of the issues they have with Episode 7 is it's a rehash of Episode 4. That's a lot of the criticisms it received. I mean, basically it is. It's a very, very similar story. Yeah. Right? And so I think what they're trying to do now is move it in a different direction. And in terms of your criticism, I think that goes back to what we mentioned earlier. If the film had focused on the original Han, Leia, Luke, it would have been a much more concise, a much more clear story. But you're trying to bring in Han, Leia, Luke. You're trying to bring in the new characters, right? And you're trying to mesh them all together. And it would have been maybe a little more streamlined if you didn't have extra characters like Finn and Poe. Now, I liked Finn in Episode 7 because I think it gave a new depth of, evil to the First Order. Whereas originally stormtroopers were clones, now we're seeing them kidnap individuals, brainwash them, torture them, and force them into becoming almost like child soldiers, right? If they get them young enough, which is sort of showing the horrible empire that used to exist still remains. It's young, it's vibrant, and it's maybe even worse than it was before. But unfortunately, with Finn's character, not enough has happened with him. It was very interesting in the first film to see him leave from the stormtroopers. How is he going to develop? What's going to happen? But he didn't grow enough as a character, I felt, in Episode 8. Right. So I think it's important that these films try and move in a new direction, but they are handicapped by trying to keep the old characters. Okay. They've left themselves in a very difficult situation. I think they're doing a decent job with what they have. I think with Episode 7, you have a decent story, fun action film, right? It's very exciting, and let's not forget, exciting.
It's a thrill run.
4, 5, and 6. 4, 5, and 6 were thrill run. Well, 4 was kind of a thrill run, right? Yeah. Especially for that time with those special effects, those were some of the big things that made it popular. They brought in
a lot of gravity to it, and there are really good slow moments. There's great slow moments of tension when Obi-Wan is shutting down the reactor.
Sure.
Those are awesome moments.
Yeah, I would agree with you. Obviously, you're not going to beat 4, 5, and 6. And I think that's one of the issues. You can't beat 4, 5, and 6. You have to create new films. You have to have different stories. You have to have different hooks and twists and feels if you're going to continue in the same line, especially with new characters. So, to get a little off topic, you and I had talked about Rogue One being a fantastic film.
Yeah, I think we both agree about that.
It's not connected to Luke, Han, Leia, Chewie.
Is that why it's a fantastic film, though? I think
that's not the only reason, but you have more creative freedom when you're moving away from these main characters. You have the ability to sort of create and build a new story with new people and new dynamics between them, without the constraints of, well, how does this fit in, with these main characters? What are we going to do with them? How do we bring in something new while keeping the old? I think once they move away from Episode 9 and they create the new trilogy, which they're talking about doing a new Netflix television series, they move away from the original story. You have this vast universe to explore. If they go explore it with totally new characters, you go back and do Knights of the Old Republic. Go awesome. 1,000 years in the future. Do, a story of people in some outer rim planet that are very, very far from the reach of the Empire, the First Order, whoever, and their daily life and struggles, right? Do something totally different. Get away from the main story.
I'm all about it. I think that's great. I completely agree. But I don't necessarily agree that the fact that putting aside the acknowledgement that they face a challenge and they're in that sort of no man's awkward land of trying to bring in the old characters and introduce new characters, acknowledging that, I think that it's very doable, in fact, if you do it the right way and if they had started on the right foot. I think if they had focused on the relationship between Han Solo and Rey and built up that dynamic and then had... Let me ask you this. If we didn't know who Rey was and we're wondering this the whole time, right, and then Rey and Han had built up this sort of, not father-daughter relationship, but a close bond,
sure,
as he reacquaints with the Millennium Falcon. And then he has the confrontation with Kylo. And now Kylo is an important character in the story. Now Rey, whether or not she's their daughter... whatever, we've brought in a new character who's force sensitive, right? And then you have Kylo, who is the son of the Skywalker family. So, right, if it had focused on that relationship, would that have been a better movie?
Oh yeah, of course. They definitely could do a better job with character development, the interactions between characters. We don't have a strong connection, and I don't think they have a strong connection in and amongst themselves. It could be better.
I submit that they didn't know exactly what they were trying to do, and if they had focused on a couple of core things, building up the relationship between... Because if they had established a really strong relationship between Rey and Han, then that death moment would have had way more impact. And she would have been brought in by the fact that we like Han, right? So she would have been sort of introduced in the right way, rather than us having to learn how to like her just because she's who she is. And now I'm kind of frustrated with her because I don't know who she is, and she's just magically, ridiculously powerful. Kylo gets a free pass because he's their son. He gets in automatically. So he's already there. It would have been, I think, if they had written that story really well, it would have been amazing. And I would be then really excited for the next one, 8.
So I think something they did well in 7 is that they brought back a nostalgic feel. For me, being an old Star Wars fan, going back and seeing my original, favorite characters and seeing them in similar moments of things they have already experienced in a new and exciting way with some new characters, it was a wonderful movie for me. But you got to think also of the times and of selling. Disney wants to sell. What's going to sell? A big summer blockbuster action. Well, it wasn't summer. It was Christmas time. But, the fancy lights, the special effects, and that's bringing in the new generation. Am I a huge fan of it? No, I would much rather see a plot, character-driven story with much more maybe dialogue and interaction. But they did bring people in. They are doing a good job of building it up. Another issue that they face is you're never going to live up to the original trilogy because it's just been glorified so much. You talk about building up the moment of Han's death. If Rey and Han had this better connection, and when Han finally dies, we would have felt some sort of emotional. She barely knows him. They don't have who's it? But if we look back at Episode 4 and try and look at it objectively, Luke meets Obi-Wan Kenobi, who he thinks is a mad wizard. He finds out, you knew my dad. He gave me a lightsaber. We travel together to Alderaan, get on a spaceship, fly, or we go to Mos Eisley, get on a spaceship to fly to Alderaan. How long did they know each other? A day?
It's not about
a day.
It's not about the length of time. Luke had suffered an emotional loss. He lost his aunt and uncle, and now he was in the process of, I don't want to say latching himself onto Obi-Wan, but he had begun to see Obi-Wan as his mentor, and imagine the sort of shift in expectations he was experiencing in that, okay, let's say it's 24 hours, where my aunt and uncle have just been burned to death and are now skeletons. And now I have this person who could be my mentor and teach me about these ways I might defend myself so that this doesn't happen to my other friends, right? And when you begin to do that and you then lose it right away, I mean, that's probably part of it. And I think it adds a little gravity to Obi-Wan's death, but I don't think that there was she wasn't looking to Obi-Wan for anything. She was already a nobody who just lived in a junkyard. So
I don't think so. I think she has sort of a daddy complex. She wants that sort of love and affection that you get from a father. She wants an older, it could be a man or a woman that she can look up to, that can train her and mentor her. You see the moments of them together on the ship. She knows the ship. She knows flying.
Yeah.
They connect on a I think a decently deep level. Is it portrayed the best it could? It was good. I could see the connection between them, and I could see why she would be upset at losing Han.
Yeah.
And we both agree that it could be done better. But it's a similar circumstance where, it's a very, very brief, interaction between them. She might have latched on to him. She's a nobody. She has nothing. This is someone that's being kind to her.
I see what you're saying. I don't necessarily think that something that you were saying, something that has to sell and be a huge blockbuster can't have the...
Hold on, you broke up.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, now you're good.
I don't think that a huge blockbuster can't have the fundamentals. Look at Disney, I don't think they're evil. I know a lot of people think they're evil, but just because a company is massive and owns Marvel and Lucasfilm doesn't mean they're
and
evil.
And soon the world.
Right.
Yeah.
That doesn't necessarily mean they're evil. I think that the Star Wars franchise, Lucasfilm, has got some things right. Again, Rogue One. They decided to kill everybody at the end of the film, and it has a lot of power, emotional power.
But we knew that was going to happen.
Well, yeah.
Right,
no, they did film an alternate version of it where it didn't, but...
Right, but from the story, from the original 4, 5, and 6,
right.
They say, all the spies died.
Look at Infinity War. Did you see Infinity War?
I did. I didn't really like Infinity War.
Right, but there is some emotional power there in the build-up to... they did that pretty well. They did that pretty well. And that was a shocking thing. You don't think, they're not going to kill half of the Avengers. Are they insane? And they do.
My goodness, something shocking?
But I feel like, it's not the best movie ever, but I think it's earned.
So I don't know. I just couldn't get into Infinity War. Too many characters. Oh, yeah, right?
For sure.
Too many characters. You have 5 to 10 minutes of screen time per person. Now, with that issue, they did a phenomenal job with it.
Right.
You still feel connection to the characters, even though they're only on screen for such a short amount of time. But I think it's become too big, too vast for me really to get connected to any of the characters in the story.
But the moment has power, does it not? It has some...
Not really. At least for me, leading up to it, I kept feeling like, I don't know if they're going to beat him. It just keeps seeming like it's not going to happen. And then he snaps, and I'm like, well, they're all going to come back. Do you think they're really dead?
I hope
that's
so.
why, for me, it has no meaning, because I know there's going to be Infinity Wars 2,
but that's a meta knowledge.
And they're all going to come back.
No, but that's a sort of meta. That's a meta critique. Because you know in your heart that Disney is a company and wouldn't kill Spider-Man because they need to make more money on Spider-Man, but that you can't allow that to affect your judgment of the film, because that's a meta reason. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense, but it still affects the way I view the film. Just like I didn't think they were going to kill off Luke. I didn't think it was going to happen the way I didn't think Luke was.
They didn't kill off Luke. Luke kind of disappeared-ish in the sunset for some reason. We're not sure why.
Well,
did Luke die, or did he just?
But
that was a very unsatisfying death. First of all, why does force projecting kill you? That's my first question. Where's the mechanic there? Oh, by the way, force projection, it's deadly. It'll kill you. Okay, now I know. After Luke Skywalker is dead. Tell me up front, why don't you? If Luke says, "Oh, if I do this, I'll die," then at least there's a little, there's a little power there. But it's like, after, is he dead, or does that you just disappear on a rock after you force project? Is that what happens? I don't know. It's very unsatisfying.
Well,
I'm okay with Luke dying.
There's a lot of things in Star Wars that are never explained. So I think he's dead. I think he has passed on. And I think there is precedent to that because we see in the original film, I remember being a small child, very, very young, watching the original film and never understanding Obi-Wan's death. I remember being, 5, 6 and watching the original movie. And I thought when you get hit with lightsabers, you just disappear. I thought that's what they did to you, right? That's never explained to us. We don't know what happened to him until later on.
Oh,
right?
come on.
As a small child.
Yeah, you're a little kid.
But they don't explain it to you. If you're just looking at episode 4 in and of itself, you don't know what happened to Obi-Wan. How does that work? How did he go on? Does everyone do that? Do you
anyone over the age 10 would figure it out, though.
So we can figure out that Luke, he strained himself to an extreme extent and able to do this, projecting himself light years away, actually physically being there and stopping an army. That strained him. He got too tired, had a heart attack, and dead.
No.
Ride a bike, it's
if during his force projection he had gone right at the end or something, and then he died right there on the rock that he was force projecting from, then you would say, oh yeah, that the effort killed him. But he stood up and he was all right. He made it. Good. He made it out the other end. Time for recovery. He looks tired. He's got to rest.
You sit down for a long time. You get a blood clot in your legs. You're like, all right, I'm going to stand. Oh, right. And for him disappearing, I mean, we saw Obi-Wan disappear. We saw Yoda lying in bed, just sort of, I'm going to pull the blanket up and poof, disappear.
Right.
So Luke standing up and then sort of just disappearing and fading into the Force. I think they're saving a lot for Episode 9.
Let's hope.
I think we're going to get more information about Rey's parents, either a concrete confirmation about whether she's a nobody or not. I think we're going to get more information. And you think she's not, probably? I think she's not. I think they're going to go in that direction, but I think they're going to give you more concrete information about it. Because I think there's speculation right now about, is Kylo Ren messing with her? Is he playing mind games with her to try and, place doubt in her belief in the Jedi Code, in the Force? Because she thinks she's special. Right. She thinks she has these wonderful parents that are going to come back to her, and you're a nobody. I don't think that's going to be it, because as you and I have discussed previously, we like a lot of the twists in 8, or we agree with them if they were presented better.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, sure.
They weren't given the best presentation. So I think they're going to go back to that. I think we're going to get more information on who Snoke was. I think they're saving a lot of things for Episode 9. I think Episode 5 was supposed to be this sort of, it leaves you with this sort of cliffhanger, like, what? Why?
You mean episode 8?
8, yeah. Episode 8. So I think they're saving it for the last film, and they're going to make it big, grandiose, lots of reveals.
You think Luke Skywalker is dead?
I think he's going to come back. I think he's dead. I think he's returned to the Force. Yeah. But I think he can come back on a whim. I think Mark Hamill is still going to be in the movie. I think Luke Skywalker is still going to be in the film.
As a ghost.
Yeah, as a ghost.
Yeah, I hope Kylo's the main character in episode 9.
Yeah. And I like that they did that they shifted from, this sort of Snoke character to Kylo Ren, moving.
Kylo's my favorite character in the new trilogy.
He's very
I like Kylo very much. I think he's cool.
Yeah. I also like, now this is bad because I don't know his name, but who is the sort of political leader of the First Order? Sort of slick back red hair, who was at odds with Kylo Ren, sort of his rival.
Oh yeah, I know who you're talking about. That guy, yeah. Yeah,
that guy. So I like the dynamic between the two of them. I like this sort of young neo-fascist First Order regime. I think it does point a lot to things that we see in the world today, which I think they've tried to do with Star Wars before, showing, the horrors of these dictatorships and such. We obviously know the Empire is much like the Nazis. And I think we're sort of seeing a younger sort of rebirth of that. I think it's an interesting way to rebuild up the Empire in a new way, and just for fun. I wish I had Photoshop skills so I could do this. When I saw episode 7 for the first time, tell you what, Kylo Ren and that other guy standing next to each other, to me, looks just like Don Jr. and Eric Trump.
Really?
I think so.
What?
I don't think it's symbolic at all. I just think it's funny. They both have the slick back hair. One's dark hair, one's red hair. I pulled up 2 pictures of them. I'm like, holy cow, they really do.
You should Photoshop that.
I can't. I don't have the skills. But I wish no one else had saw. I wanted to send out.
If
right
you're the only one, you owe it to.
Did
I
you guys
feel
see
like
this?
you owe it to Reddit or Instagram to do that.
I think it really does.
Yeah. That's something that Shithead Steve would share. I think probably. Are you familiar with Shithead Steve?
No idea who that
He's
is.
my favorite Instagrammer. He just posts memes, but they're always funny. They're always funny. He's a meme person. I don't know who he really is, but his handle is Shithead Steve.
Bet his name's not even Steve.
Probably not. No, it's probably
Liar.
like Cheryl, but he's a man. So, I mean, you have to know the mechanics of story because you create stories, or you have been recently.
Yeah, a nice segue.
Hey, thanks for calling it out. What was the segue?
You know quite a bit about stories because you create your own, or at least you have been recently.
Ooh, good one.
Yeah. Are you just complimenting yourself?
Shooting from the hip. Yeah. Yeah. So you do you're DMing Dungeons and Dragons. But I haven't seen you guys playing recently.
We played like 3 weeks ago.
Yeah,
it's tough.
I was just waking up one time. I was in China and I saw that you guys were on a call, and I thought, oh, I'll listen in, and then it ended. Just
the
after
last
I
game
woke
was
up.
pretty good. Last game was pretty good. It lasted a couple hours.
So a couple questions. Where are you guys now? And then how do you decide how to make a story? And do you have to keep in mind some of the things we were talking about earlier, the universals of storytelling, or do you go for shock value, episode 8 style?
I try and stick with the classic universal story, of heroes, a myth, because I know the shock value comes from my players. The fun thing about Dungeons and Dragons, and especially being a DM, is I can create
Dungeon Master. If somebody doesn't know what that means,
yes, Dungeon Master.
And if you haven't seen episode 8, spoiler alert.
I did try and say that at the beginning before I talked about Han. You need to put a little disclaimer on that.
I don't care.
So one of the fun things about being a DM is I can create a story, and I can create all of these characters. And I can create this route that I think people are going to go in, or multiple routes. I think they're going to do this, and then this will happen, and we'll go here. But it all goes to shit. Especially
always?
with a group of... yes, always. The people that I'm playing with, they're all very good friends of mine. We all know each other in real life, IRL. And they just like dicking around. I mean, they just... there's an old woman, let's kill her.
Yeah, they're very silly people.
Yeah, and they just do things just to be silly, right? And so...
And I only know them from those personas. I don't know them IRL. I only know them in the game, which is interesting as well, because I know them only as characters, and I listen in sometimes. And I don't know if they're actually like that, or if that's the character they're playing. So it's interesting to me to think about, these guys actually this chaotic in real life.
Yeah, so no, they're not that bad in real life. But when they get in game, they're very chaotic, and it's made the story harder to build, at least a finite story, because I know anything I plan, anything I build is just going to go completely awry. But that's what makes it more fun. So our story, our route has gone up, down. I mean, it's just a big squiggly line, what has happened in the game thus far,
narratively and in terms of the map itself.
Yes. So for making stories, basically what I try and do, and I learned this, one of my favorite authors is R.A. Salvatore, and it's a good segue from Star Wars into Dungeons and Dragons, because R.A. Salvatore is actually the individual that wrote the book, spoiler alert, where Chewbacca dies. I don't know if you knew that. Yeah. So in one of the Legends books, Lucasfilms said we need a main series character to die, right? To add depth and gravity into the story. No one ever dies, right? So they told him, you're going to write this book. You have the freedom to sort of do whatever you want. But in the end, Chewbacca dies. And he got
that was
so
their
many
only parameter.
death threats. And I mean, it was just it's a horrible explosion in the Star Wars community for him.
Did he get death threats because of the way that he made a Chewbacca die?
No, I don't think so. I think it was just because Chewbacca was dead. Now, I never read that book.
Well, he must have done a great job making it impactful then. If people,
I know. I remember seeing an interview of him talking about it, and he said, if Chewbacca was going to go, I think that would be a way to go. I know Chewbacca was on his home planet of Kashyyyk, and he was protecting the Wookiee people from I don't know what imminent danger, and he sacrificed himself to save his people. And he thought that would be the most noble, heroic way for a character like Chewbacca.
Totally.
Yeah. So. Now,
how do they do dialogue in that book? I wonder. And then Chewbacca says, and then his mom says, that's how they do dialogue in the Star Wars Christmas special. There is a whole 20-minute segment before B. Arthur sings. The hologram of B. Arthur starts singing, where it's Chewie's, I think, little brother and his mom at home, and she's washing the dishes, and he's watching B. Arthur hologram on a table sing, and he goes, and she goes, and then he goes, and they do that for 20 minutes.
That's great.
It's painful to watch, but if anybody hasn't seen the Star Wars, it's either the Star Wars Holiday Special or the Star Wars Christmas Special, but it is almost unbearable.
I have added the soundtrack, all the Christmas songs, into my Christmas playlist.
Of course you have.
Just to for fun. You have it on in the house, and we have a lot of the classics. Sing Josh Groban, El Divo singing Ave Maria and these big songs, or Bing Crosby, and then suddenly, What Do You Get a Wookiee for Christmas comes on.
It's like Christmas Rick rolling people.
Right. So anyways, back to R.A. Salvatore.
Yeah.
Something he said in one of the forwards to one of his books was, just create the characters. If you create great characters, interesting characters, the story will just flow. It will just come out of the characters. So I try and create characters, and obviously I know they're not going to last long in the game, that I think are interesting and engaging and exciting and have different personality traits or motives or things behind them. And the story just comes from the characters, from their motivations, from their desires. And I think that's an easier way for me to build my D&D, my Dungeons and Dragons campaign, is make it very character focused. Anything more in depth than that, obviously, is not going to last.
So I'm curious about the possibility tree and how in depth the possibility tree is. So if you for one day say have a possibility tree of they could go this way or they could go that way, and there's, for example, there's a character over here and they go that way. I don't mean physically, I mean sort of in the story.
No, I understand what you're. Yeah.
So they go that way on the possibility tree. Do you take this character who you like and stick them over here, or is this character just gone forever now? And you've built this great character, this interesting character who never gets met. And do you, if they don't put that character somewhere and keep him away for a rainy day?
It happens, and I'm left heartbroken.
Really?
Yeah, it's happened quite a few times. I'll have a very interesting character that I think that they can engage with, and it would be great for the general direction that I want the story to go. This is going to be sort of a main character in their quest for whatever. And I'll introduce a character, and they'll be like, "No, leave that. We don't like that person. Just leave him behind, or kill him, or whatever." And then it's just like,
do you have an example? Do you have a specific example?
Let me think of a concrete example of a character.
A character that was supposed to be a good narrative character with a real role to play that was immediately either sacrificed or jettisoned.
Well, I did do a game where they were trying to infiltrate a sort of evil fraternity that wanted to bring about the apocalypse. And so they had to go through all these initiation rituals. And one of them was drinking the Kool-Aid, which, of course, no questions asked, they drank Kool-Aid. And I think I even presented it as such.
You said it was Kool-Aid.
To some extent. I obviously didn't say Kool-Aid, because I try and keep it as in-game as possible. So I'll be like, it was a red ale or something.
Right.
And so they all pass out, and they wake up in this room, and it's the 4 of the players, and then there's an NPC. And so they're in this room, and the NPC is like the only clue as to what's going on, what's going to happen, how do we get out of here? Why did these people do it to us? And as soon as the person wakes up, and before you even talk to her, they're just like, oh shit, punk, and they killed her.
So you did. Why was it so easy for them to kill her? Couldn't you have made it so you suddenly scale up that person's power?
We're playing with a group of young men, and before her to get her to show them her boobies, and it's obviously I'm trying to stay in character, and this character would be like, oh no, why would I do that? We're trapped down here. We have to get out, and And then they're like, well, if you're not going to show us your boobies, we're going to kill you. And there was actually a cliff, and she was pushed off the cliff. And so, so that was one where I'm like, now how do I get these people through the rest of this game? Because that character was the one that held all of the information as to what was going on. Right. So then while we're playing, I have to think of new ways for this story to develop. That person was supposed to help them get out.
She would have gone with them, and they would have got to know her.
She was a little more knowledgeable about what was going on. She's a little more intelligent than my players.
There could have been some maybe dynamics between them in conversation over time.
Definitely. And so then I'm stuck with, okay, now how do I keep the story going, and I don't just have them trapped in here twiddling their thumbs, right? So we've had a lot of instances like that.
But that makes it both frustrating and more fun.
It does. One of my favorites was they were stealing items from 2 competing organizations. They had this sort of apocalyptic group, and then they had this sort of underground gang that dealt in stolen magical items. And so they were sort of stealing from both of them at the same time, and both of these groups were very angry with him. So in order to try and kill 2 birds with 1 stone, they were going to try and get all of the bad people in one place at one time and kill them all.
Right.
They had a rock concert.
Sounds very Red Wedding sounding.
Yes, basically, yeah. So they had this big rock concert at their castle, and they had a VIP section, one for this bad group, one for this bad group, right? And the plan was they had cannons lined up all along the roof, and they were going to shoot the cannons into the audience. Now you have Apocalypse bringing brotherhood, you have sort of gangsters, mafia group, and then they invited all of the senior citizens from the nearby town of Waterdeep, all the nursing homes, anyone over the age of 65.
No barricades?
They like all in their walkers, and they were all seated up front in the danger zone, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm like, okay, well, maybe they'll try really hard to make this happen or whatever, and they'll save the common folk. I have hope for them.
Yeah.
One of the players, our paladin, who worships a satanic god, but he's supposed to be good, pulls a random grandmother on stage. And they have all the city watch there. Like, we have all these bad people. You're going to try and jump out and get them, right? And he just murders her in front of everyone. Just murders grandma, right?
Why does he do that? Why does he do that?
He was trying to invoke the power of his god. If I sacrifice,
so he's a noble character, a good character, worshiping an evil deity.
Yeah,
who sacrifices an innocent old lady on stage at a rock concert.
Yes. So we play by house rules. Basically, we don't play strictly in one version of D&D and just with D&D lore. So he worships his own god of Satanus.
Right. It's very almost sounds like Satan, but it's not. It's different.
It's his little twist on Satan.
But he's a good god. Satanus is a good god. He has to be, because you can't.
He's sort of a neutral, not good nor evil god.
What is his alignment? Is he lawful good?
He's supposed to be, but he doesn't really know. Because I keep telling them all of them were supposed to be good. I think most of them are neutral good. But then they kept doing stuff like this. I just want to remind you guys, we can change you guys can be evil. That's fine. So anyways, he murders this person. And then the city watch is like, well, we're going to arrest that guy.
Yeah, right.
And the person shooting the cannons at the two groups of evil people rolls a 1, a critical miss. So obviously all the senior citizens go.
Yeah, sure. Low accuracy, crit fail on the cannon.
Right, that was a horrible decision to do. Bad guys, senior citizens. So basically the way this game was supposed to go, totally different. Now my main character has committed murder. There was an accident that has murdered hundreds of senior citizens, all at their house, at their party, at their concert. But it led to one of the most interesting parts of the game, which for the next several games after that, we had a mock trial.
Right. That's amazing. Right.
They were put on trial, and his friends had to go and be his lawyers, and they were able to call witnesses, and they were able to role play some of the different witnesses, and then I would help. I played as the prosecution. That person had to. And so for the next 2 or 3 games, all we did was a mock trial.
That is awesome. It's sort of like you have to confine yourself to what would happen. You have to be realistic, because if you just say, well, okay, you guys are the main characters, we're going to go do something else, then for everybody, for you and for them, the game starts to lose its meaning. And it's not really a game anymore. Now it's just sort of an instant gratification session. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Whereas if you say, well, if this were a real situation, even though it's a ridiculous situation where we're having a rock concert and senior citizens and gang members and their cult or people trying to end whatever. Yeah. Even though we're in this ridiculous situation, the rules of common sense have to apply, and your job is to enforce the rules of common sense. This person would have to be prosecuted if that were to happen, because there is the city guard there. So that's the interesting part to me, that within this ridiculous reality, you have to be the sort of common sense enforcer of what would happen, and that forces them, the party, to deal with the consequences of their actions. Even and they have to know the next time that, well, if I do something ridiculous, I might have consequences that I have to maybe unpleasant consequences that I have to go through. A several game trial is a ridiculous thing to do in D&D. Honestly, I've never heard of that kind of thing happening. Right. It's insane. But the fact that you followed through with it is also really admirable. I mean, it's cool. So in that trial, did it feel like, was it a real trial? Did it feel like it followed the rules of how a trial would go, or was there?
We just based it off of what you would see in a modern American court system.
Right.
So we had opening statements. We let the prosecution go first and call witnesses. The defendant didn't have to take the stage and testify against themselves. After the prosecution rested, the defense could. So basically, it was that same sort of order and system. Did it feel like a real court case? No, obviously not, because Did
they get bored, or was...
No, they definitely didn't get bored. But what they were trying to... So, for example, the person that committed the murder, his character name is Elam, he decided to take the stand. And, he whatever his spiel was, basically his defense was that she wanted to die. First they were trying to say that it was special effects. They've created a new thing called special effects, and they were trying to pitch that, but there was dead people, there were real bodies,
right?
And so he then said that she wanted to die.
So is euthanasia?
basically. And so
on stage.
What he then tried to do was summon her dead corpse to come to the courthouse to testify.
That's creative. I really like that. That's
and I did
creative.
too. I thought that was very cool. He obviously doesn't have the ability on his skill sheet. I said, okay, you can roll for it. I can't remember what. I think I just told him just standard D20, and you can add your religion bonus or something. Well, he rolled really high.
Right.
Got a really high roll. So I thought, okay, I'll let that happen. But logistically, for Grandma to climb out of she's buried, to climb out of there.
She could come in spirit, though, right?
I had her physically come.
Oh, you did?
And so she did come. And she showed up, but she got there late after the character had been executed. And so one of his punishments was for the next couple games, he had to play as Granny Smith.
Ah. And
I created a whole new character with her own abilities. She had abilities like Apple of My Eye and Granny-like. And he enjoyed that. For the next several games, he played as Granny Smith because he summoned her from the dead. And she actually still lives in their castle as a zombie.
As a zombie.
They kept her.
And you would have never imagined that would happen.
I would never. So that's one of the fun things of this is it's just a story. I create what is going to happen. I create all of these different routes and a sensible, as you said, I have to make it seem somewhat realistic. If they can just kill someone and then then there's no fun. There's no consequence. Yeah, it doesn't seem real enough. So I have to be that person. But when they do something like that, I'll say, okay, we'll work with it, right? Now we have a new character, and on the fly I have to think, what is this character?
You probably had to research
story?
The legal procedure and actually how to.
Yes.
Yeah.
I did at least didn't have to do it too in depth, but yeah.
Does that make it more fun for you?
Yeah, definitely.
Is that
it's time consuming.
Right.
It can be very, very time consuming, but no, it is extremely enjoyable, especially, when you have a game and it goes well and the session is really smooth and the story, everyone's really engaged and interested in what's going to happen. And you've listened into a lot of my stories.
Right.
Most of my sessions aren't very combat based.
That's what I like about it. I think it gets back to the reason that I think episode 7 we're talking about should have been in one little base. If it's driven by what your favorite author, what's his name, R.A. Salvatore, is that right? If it's driven by characters and driven by those deep underlying story elements, those things that are universal, then it's going to be interesting, and there's going to be a lot of space if you're playing D&D for exploring that with conversation, coming up with ridiculous things in a trial like summoning someone from the dead. But if it's all bang, bang, boom, boom, action, fighting, explosions, then it feels really cheap. And I think that's the reason why when people try to analyze movies and stories, that's one of the main reasons why some are judged as good and some are judged as poor, or some become classics and some don't. Even though I think people don't often recognize that that's what it is, right? I mean, the reason I love Star Trek is that there are entire episodes of Star Trek. For example, Star Trek The Next Generation is a little more action-packed, but Deep Space Nine, a lot of it is conversation-driven, character-driven, people just talking about things. But because the characters are very believable and the conversations that they have move this plot forward, and those things imply the things that make you think about and imagine these sort of the world, the universe, then most of it has to happen in your mind. And that's what I think great art should do. I think great art should imply as much as possible. If you have a great character and you're following a great character, they don't have to actually do all of this fighting, or they don't have to do that much. They just have to have interesting interactions, and then a lot of the stuff that happens, the plot points, a lot of that can be implied. And I think a lot of the universe can be implied. I told you yesterday I was just finishing a treasure hunt,
right?
And it's the same sort of idea. I want to try to imply as much as possible about this universe, because the more space that is left empty, the more people can fill it with their own imagination.
Mm-hmm.
And if you imply it correctly, then that becomes, it sort of sticks with people and it lingers. And if you force everything visually and you sort of create the entire universe and show it to people, then their entire understanding of that universe is only that. That's why I don't like when somebody has a photo of a character on the front of a novel, because then that is the image that's stuck in my mind when I'm reading it. If you just show me some abstract sort of outline of a character or something very, maybe the if it's Lord of the Rings, maybe the dragon, but a cartoonish version, then I'm going to be able to summon my own imagination, and that's what makes, I think that's why movies don't eclipse literature. That's why literature still exists, because in a way it's more powerful because most of it's being manufactured in your mind.
Sure.
And I think for a story like that, the one you described, making it less about fighting and more about, I guess what I'm trying to say is making it less about fighting and more about the interaction and more about the characters is probably more impactful. And I've listened to them, and I would say it definitely is, because if it's all just rolling, strike this and move here and roll and do that, I've done that because I've played D&D before, and I've been in 3-week-long battles, and it's just dreary.
Monotonous.
It's very monotonous. Yeah, very monotonous. Yeah. Why do you think D&D still exists then? Why does it need to exist if you can play video games and you can be a character and inhabit a universe, and you and that group of people play a lot of video games, right?
Yeah, I think
how can both of them? You know what I mean?
I think you just hit the nail on the head with why is literature still around? Well, because most of it happens in your mind, and that makes it much more powerful and much more personal, right? Because you are putting some of yourself in the story because you have to interpret what is going on. It's not just being given to you. Yeah.
Right.
And I think in Dungeons and Dragons, it's very similar to that. Is I'm providing some of the story, and they're playing these characters and putting some of themselves into it, but they have to imagine, they have to think, what is it? And I bet you, if you asked each one of my players, the places they've been, the things that happened, they're all going to recount the adventures in different ways, because they each left each game thinking or feeling something different or seeing something different. What they pictured happened, what that character looked like, what this place looked like, what was the point of what we did here is going to be different for each one of the players. Whereas in a video game, you're being told, this is what you're getting, a visual story, almost like a movie.
Right.
I think one of the other reasons is freedom. In most video games, they're quite linear. You have a story that you're going through and you're being told, which is fine. I enjoy that. Some of them are open world, but it can never be completely open world. You can never be as open world as Dungeons and Dragons. In Dungeons and Dragons, they can do anything they want. They can go anywhere they want. They can do anything they want. There are consequences for those actions. That is my job, to make sure there are consequences. There is cause and effect, but it's totally open, totally free. And so it gives you a chance to sort of play in a whole new world that you're building in your mind, but you're sharing with other people, and they're moving things around in your world, and you're building it together, which makes it very, very interesting.
So it's sort of like colliding mental spaces. And
sure.
It's in a way it's kind of like currency, because currency is only a real thing because everyone thinks it's a real thing. Yeah. So first of all, everyone has to accept that you are the one who's created this reality, and everyone has to sort of buy into it. And if one person says, wait a second, you're just making up a story, I don't believe this, then none of it works. So first everybody has to buy into the fact that this is a in a way real thing, even though it's sort of above reality. And then once they do that, everyone's understanding of that real place collides and intermingles with yours and with each other's.
Right.
But how do you make them take full advantage of the possibilities? Because, as you said, when you're playing a video game, you have a possibility tree, but they have to make it relatively finite because they're working within the confines of the amount of space that the game is going to take up on a disk or on your hard drive, and if it's completely infinite and it's generated, then it's going to be monotonous. And even though, what is that game where you can travel around to billions of planets, and it's a game where you can travel around in space and visit.
I don't know.
And they generate planets, so it's actually infinite. But actually, the things that you do on the planet is the same. You harvest materials. You have a gun. You can't do that much. You can't just say, "I will summon a flower and make it be there." You know what I mean? You can't just think of anything. But when you're playing a game, if you have prestidigitation, and that's your spell, and you say, "I would like to flavor this tea." As ostrich feces, right, and give it to my friend. Whatever you want to do, okay, that's fine, because you have that ability. That's your spell, and you could have said anything in that place, right? So, how do you? Maybe it's not up to you, but do you find that there are players who understand and grasp that freedom better than others, or do you feel like? Yeah, go ahead.
There are obviously people that grasp that better than others, but with this group, none of us had played D&D ever before coming together to play. It's something that we've always wanted to play, but no one knew how to do it. You froze. Can you hear me?
You've never played it either. It's interesting that you're DMing. You've never actually played it.
I've never played. Yeah, I've never played.
But that's not fair, because you're steeped in it. I mean, you are you've been swimming in the lore and other podcasts, and
I love fantasy, whether it be space genre, Star Wars, or sort of D&D, Forgotten Realms, those books and stories, or watching other people play Dungeons and Dragons. I do follow a couple different podcasts, and I pull a lot from what I've learned there. So with this group, no one had played before. They didn't really know what they were doing, and I had this idea of having this really big open world where they could do anything they wanted, but the very first couple of games were very linear. I would provide them with a situation, or they'd be in a room and this would be the bad guy. And it's like, okay, let's kill him, right? Or let's hit this. They were not using the environment. They weren't thinking of trying to do something. Well, let's circumnavigate this. And maybe we could talk to this person. So how did I get them to start doing that? I would have to start providing them with hints.
This girl with the boobies,
well,
she knows stuff. She has a brain.
Right. But see, I don't want to influence the game, so I tried to leave. I used to leave subtle hints. I would describe a room, and I would describe all the things in the room, hoping they would use things in the room. Yeah. Then I would have to be a little more blunt and be like, "This giant monster is standing right under an enormous chandelier." Right, to give them the idea of, instead of shooting that, let's shoot the chandelier, right? And then I started using NPCs to try and give them ideas, right? And one of the NPCs that follows them around a lot is
non-playable character, by the way, if somebody doesn't know what that means.
Yeah, the jargon. Finny Finkelbottom. He is a gnome wizard that sort of oversees their business operations, and Finny provides them with a lot of guidance. He's very old and very wise, and I use him to give them ideas. So
he's a regular character.
He is a regular. He is at their home castle. And so one of the ideas was trying to infiltrate the cult. He said, well, I could create a magical item for you. Mm-hmm. Right. And then they have a magical item. I could make it look identical. They could sense that it had magical powers, but they can't sense what the powers are. So if you tried to swap them, they would see an item that looks the same, and they would feel the same resonating magic within it, so they might not be able to tell the difference. Right. So I gave them that suggestion through that character. They had then the freedom to decide what the magical properties of this new weapon was. And I'm sure you've heard of this. This has been a famous item in our game. They chose that anyone who touches this dagger will gain a massive erection, uncontrollable erection,
right?
And they will shit their pants.
What if a woman picks it up?
I guess she just is aroused.
It's not as obvious.
I don't think, yeah. And they had so much fun with this thing. They would just be walking around handing it to people. Oh, hey, hold my dagger for a second. And then I would have to role play that person. Potty humor galore. But
sure.
From there, they were able to figure out, hey, we can really spread out and start doing more things and start using the environment. And so now they'll be asking questions like, can I roll perception to see what's in the room? Can I see what's available? There's vines in the juggles. Well, we could make a makeshift rope from that and then tie it around this and then do whatever. So they're growing a lot as players in terms of thinking outside of the box, which is more enjoyable. So it took some.
So it's sort of like easing them into it by first giving them choices. Here's this thing, you can do whatever you want, but it has to be three characteristics. And then that sort of acclimates them to a way of thinking sort of flexibly about whatever space they're in. Mm-hmm. And I get that. When I was first playing, I was always stressed out about understanding my character sheet. When I first started playing, I would always have to ask, okay, so do I need to make a perception check, or what should I be rolling? What do I add to what? What is the difference between AC and understanding that was always so stressful to me that at first I wasn't really able to sink into my character. But I think once I was able to get a feel for that, and it was still sort of technical, the guy who was running the campaign was more technically oriented in terms of following rules and checking things and making sure everything worked out and making sure it was exact. I think you're a little bit more devil may care about your playstyle, which is probably a good thing because you make room for whatever to happen. To each his own or her own.
Yeah.
But once I got into it and once it became comfortable, I sort of felt acclimated so that I could actually start thinking about who am I as a character. And I think that's the really interesting part about it as a player. So as a DM, I get the creative component to it because I think that's more interesting to me because I like making things as well and building a possibility tree. I get how that would be cool, but I think playing it, when you really start to acclimate to all of the rules and just the form factor of the format, figuring out who this person is, not me. It's not even a part of myself, but it's this person that's sort of in this non-real layered dimension actually exists. And okay, this person that I've chosen is chaotic good. What does that mean exactly? Can you be chaotic good?
Yes, you can.
Chaotic good. I think I was chaotic neutral, my main character, Mavis Beacon. But what does that mean exactly? And what types of things would I say if I were that way? And if you're playing an evil character, and it's easier to do, I think, if you're playing a video game because you see yourself. You see yourself look evil. Like when you play a game like Knights of the Old Republic, you see yourself becoming evil, and you see your horns, and you realize that the choices you make are leading you down a certain path that's going to be interesting in its own right. But it's easier to do that, I think, in a video game. I think it takes a little bit more work and effort to try to get your head around who this person is because you kind of see it as yourself. And you say, I'm here this week to play this thing, and I'm just going to be me and do whatever I want. But if you really accept who this character is, that this person is from a place with a specific race and has their own language and comes from a tradition, it might seem sort of silly to try to accept all those things. But I think if you can, and you can really get into it, then it's almost a way to explore a mental space that you wouldn't otherwise be able to explore, because we don't just walk around unless we're schizophrenics exploring other characteristics of ourselves, other parts of ourselves. So I think it's a great exercise in, I don't know if it's empathy. I don't know what it is exactly.
I was actually waiting for you to finish so I could say, actually, it's kind of an exercise in empathy. Yeah, I think.
But is empathy the right word? Because empathy has this connotation of being a good thing. But I think there's merit in playing a purely evil character. It's fiction. It's a mental exercise.
But the important thing is motive, right? Because empathy, you're trying to see things from their point of view. If you're, some of my guys, when they're playing, it's like, let's do this just to do it because it's funny. But they've really started getting into their characters and understanding who their characters are. What is their motive? What is their story? What is their idea that's different than my own? And how do I understand how they will act in a certain situation? And why would they do that? Or when presented with these options, what would my character choose? Right? And that's something I reward players on.
Right.
If they do something that would make sense for their character as shown by, what has happened before, their sort of general personality traits, even though that might not be the best decision at that time. And as a player, it's not. I usually try and reward them for doing so, because you have to really get into this character. And as you said, sort of see it as an extension. It's not you, but it's someone else that you're playing, and sort of see the world through their eyes. What would they do? Why would they choose these things? So I think it is, to some extent, a practice in empathy. Minor one, right? A very minor one, but it's a good mental exercise, I would say.
Well, definitely. I think that I'm always fascinated by mental space, because we really live mostly in mental space. We walk through the world and it's the same world, but the mind can make a hell of heaven and a heaven of hell, right? The mind is what interprets the world. And actually, it's the virtual reality simulation in our brains that makes the world what it is to us. I mean, it's not like we actually see the world. We see a representation of the world mentally, and we interpret it visually and maybe audibly the same way, perhaps, almost, but the higher levels of interpretation are what makes room for our personality types to cause us to do different things in the real world.
Yeah.
So we are doing that every day in reality. It's just that we've accepted all of the paradigms of society that sort of enforce our behavior, and we become the creatures that we are because we think that there's only one way to be. And maybe there is only one way to be because you develop your personality and it comes from your habits over time. And there are things that you can't just suddenly change, like, I want to be funny now. You can't just be funny. You have to have the right sort of, I guess, carrots and sticks and the right maybe upbringing to have that capacity. But I think that I find it fascinating that there is this mental space, almost like, are you familiar with the idea of Hilbert space?
No.
The Hilbert space is this. Are you familiar with the idea of a measurement happening and then actually both things happen? If there are two possibilities, a yes or a no. For example, somebody asks you if you want to go on vacation with them, and you say yes. That creates another universe, in fact, where you said no. And there are two realities, and they've separated. And for every single thing that happens where particles, I don't fully understand it, but this space of possibilities, mathematical possibilities, the entire range of mathematical possibilities in the world, everything that could have happened throughout time, is this mathematical space called Hilbert space.
Okay.
And I think the mental world is kind of like Hilbert space in a way, because we're just bags of meat walking around, but we explore the reality that we're in mentally, and because of that, we can really go almost anywhere. There are some people who are really good at things because of the mental steps that they've taken toward that, whether it's a skill or a characteristic. There are mental steps that they've taken, and maybe they're the only person who have those things because they have a unique path. And I think by whether it's playing games or just having conversations or thinking about something you haven't thought about before, I think that you can open up, just as the characters are getting used to the idea of having all these possibilities in this vast possibility tree. I think it's a great way to open up the possibilities of living in the world, and sort of realizing that, we have this gigantic mental space every day, and you don't have to just sit on the sofa and do nothing. You could think about something you've never thought about before. You could explore a new mental space, and that's why I'm interested in it. But getting back to D&D,
Yeah.
Sorry for the tirade.
Some of my players, I don't know if they're getting that sort of experience with our D&D game.
I'm not saying that it is.
No, I know.
I'm just saying I'm fascinated by the concept of exploring that sort of space, and I think
that's why D&D is still around.
Yeah.
I think we sort of innately are interested in that sort of space and that sort of, infinite array of possibilities that are open to you, and exploring a world through someone else's eyes, through a different person or character that's not necessarily you. I mean, how would it feel to be, evil? How would it feel to be apathetic towards everything? How would it feel to be chaotic good and a hero and always trying to save the day? Well, maybe that's not who you are inside. And it's very interesting to try and then go through a world in that way with this sort of infinite amount of possibilities available to you. Sort of go wherever you would like to go with this character.
Can we keep going on this track for a few minutes? Because I want to explore that mental space, whatever we'll call it. Let's just call it mental Hilbert space or whatever. Okay. The possibility tree of existence, right? I'm also interested in what you and I share, that perhaps people from other countries don't share. In other words, what is part of our mental experience of the world that's common because we both are guys who grew up in America in relatively normal homes? And what is it like to be another person, either in a completely different type of upbringing or in another country? This is one reason I like travel, because you see people behaving differently and you wonder, their mental worlds are very different.
Oh yes.
The reality that they're in mentally is so different from mine. I do not understand their actions, and that I find that happens quite frequently. Not necessarily in a bad way, but you've traveled around quite a bit. Have you experienced? Has your mental space changed because of the traveling that you've done?
Of course. I think, one, we are limited by language, which I think would be another interesting topic that could go on for a very long time. But I mean, when you think about it,
we'll do another one on that, maybe.
Right. As a baby, and there are studies into this, I am nowhere near an expert on them, just know that they are happening, that their thoughts are not constrained by language. But once you acquire your first language, your entire world is now shaped by that language, because all of your thinking happens in English. You're not thinking just freely. You're thinking in a certain particular language, and that completely confines or constrains what the possibilities are for you. So you might not have that Hilbert, infinite, tree of possibilities.
At least it doesn't seem like it, or it's not there.
Right, because there might be so many ideas or concepts or feelings or things for which you don't have a word for in your native language. And I think learning another language opens up your idea or your mind to new things, to new feelings, to new expressions. And I think that's part of travel, is acquiring a foreign language. And I definitely think that changes your perspective and gives you sort of a new way of looking at certain things, because you might have a new way of thinking about them in that second language.
How specifically has that worked for you? Because you're fluent in Chinese.
Yes.
Or did you learn it too late?
Say. No. I definitely didn't learn it too late. I don't think no matter when you learn the language, I think it's definitely going to have an effect on you. It's one of those things like where change happens so gradually that you cannot witness it while it's happening.
Yeah, it's like losing weight.
Losing weight, gaining weight, right? You see yourself in the mirror every day, but then you see a picture of 10 years ago, and holy cow, I look so different, right? Yeah. So it's very, very hard for me to put a finger on what new concepts I have now, or new ways of looking at things I have now, because Chinese in my everyday life is actually my main language. It's my home language. It's my work language. So that's what I use the majority of my time, even living here in America. It's very, very hard to say how has changed my perspective and view of the world, but it definitely has. There are lots of things in the Chinese language that exist that don't exist in English, and I think a lot of them are represented in the language and in the culture. So when a lot of Americans look at things in Chinese culture that they think are very strange or they don't understand, you're looking at a foreign culture. If you understand the language, a lot of times you can understand why people act the way they do, why certain things are the way they are for that group of people. So,
well, and there are entire businesses built around that concept. There's one of my partners in the company that I work in now. He has another company. It's a game company, and what they do is they take games from the West and they reinterpret them. They actually rebuild the characters in the games. They rewrite storylines, plot lines. They basically localize the game for the Chinese audience. And obviously the people making the decisions for how to localize the games are Chinese people, because they understand what will resonate. So there are games that maybe as they are in the West don't resonate don't resonate as well and might not really take off. But once they've been localized and they get the raw code of the game and they rewrite the code to localize it to Chinese culture specifically. And there's a freeze there for a second. And I think they might do it for Japanese games as well, but they rewrite the code to make it more palatable to the Chinese audience. And that is a sort of physical manifestation of that concept of, you know, if you do it this way, it will not resonate, but it resonates this way because there are the cultural norms are different, and the way people here see the world is fundamentally different, whether it's from language or other things. But that seems to be part of it. I think it's more than just language. I mean,
definitely more than just language, but I think language definitely is a component that can help broaden your view.
Well, and it is like staring down when you approach some of the concepts that are not familiar to you from another culture. In some ways, it feels like staring down a wide chasm. When I first came into contact with the concept of guanxi, which I don't even know, how do we say that in English? Is there a way to say it?
So there would be a very good example of something that we don't understand on the same level.
But when you approach it and when you see examples of it, then it's sort of like you've a little peephole has opened up into this vast space that is way too complicated that you're never going to fully understand. But you now have an awareness that it exists, where before you didn't even know that was a thing.
Right. I mean, it is a thing. It is a thing.
No, but
we
you
just don't see it the same way.
Well, your pathway was this way, and it's opened up a vista, a window.
Right. Well, guanxi is we're looking at networking, your relationships between people. And we have that in the United States, right? It's not what you know, it's who you know, right? And we network, but it's just not on the same level, or it's not as important as it is in China. And
that's not an accurate word either. If you say guanxi is networking,
there's no real. There's a lot of words like that people ask me to translate, and I say there's no direct translation. Another one that I was asked a lot about in China would be sajiao.
Yeah.
And sajiao is something you're familiar with. And if no one's familiar with the concept, sajiao, the best way you could translate it would be whiny.
Right, but really when I think of that word, it's because of my associations to behaviors that I've seen. So, I mean, my Chinese level is far, far, far below yours. But the way that I picked up and learned the Chinese that I did was very non-academic. So I picked up the things that I know from interactions, and so my concept of both of those things are experiential. So if I'm only looking through a tiny peephole, okay, but I'm aware that it exists in a way that is tied to my experience. And it's just that when you grow up as a Chinese person, those things are far more profound, and they're just sort of come as a package into your life, and you just take that as who you are, almost part of yourself. Just as we might associate the idea of being independent people and self-reliance, those being virtues, that doesn't even exist. When I told some friends the story of the man who was brought to court by his parents at the age of 30 because he wouldn't move out, and they sued him, their son, trying to get him to move out. They thought it was for his own good because he was a loser. But I understand the concept of wanting your child to be self-reliant and be able to stand up on your own 2 feet, because it's a virtue which has percolated down from the people who started in Europe and made the decision to leave a life which was uncomfortable and come to a new place, a scary decision, and the people who decided to separate themselves from a country that actually hadn't done anything that bad. I mean, taxes, it's not really a big deal. People have done worse. It's not that bad. But
I'm sure there's some historians that will argue with you over that.
I know, but another country might not have been so obstinate, right?
Sure.
And so it's sort of percolated down from our history, and you and I probably in our mental worlds, we probably share this concept of what self-reliance is and what it isn't, that perhaps to a Chinese person who comes here would seem very foreign, because living with your parents in China is a virtue in many cases.
Yes. And
being supported by your family because you lost your job is just fine. It's totally, of course, my parents will help me. It's much deeper. You're more enmeshed in the concept of family, whereas we see ourselves as everyone's a lone wolf in a way, and that we understand what that means, even if we can't quite articulate it.
So let's give some concrete examples to a couple of these things. You're definitely correct in that would be a way that culture and or language shapes our view of the world, right? In the United States, there has always been a very heavy influence on self-reliance, on being independent. 18, you move out of the house, you're on your own 2 feet, you do your own thing, right? We see that as being a virtue, right? Whereas in China and many East Asian cultures, the family unit is the most important. It's all about the family. And to give a concrete example of that would be the language, right? For anyone that has ever learned Chinese, one of the hardest things you can learn is the family tree, because everyone in the Chinese family has their own unique name in terms of the language, right? So, for example, in English, we say brother or sister. Luke, you have 2 brothers, right? I don't know if your brother is older than you or younger than you. I would have to ask, are your brothers older or younger? Right? But in Chinese, you would instantly know exactly the relation of that person to you. So, for example, a brother that is older than you is referred to as 哥哥. One that is younger than you, 弟弟.
I'll put subs right here.
I think I'm explaining it.
No, I don't understand.
Again, for sisters, right, you have a term for older and younger. When you're moving out into the family tree, it gets more difficult. There is a different set of words for your paternal grandparents than your maternal grandparents. Your mother's side of the family, all of the aunts and uncles over there have certain words that refer to them, and then even more specific words depending on if they are older or younger than your mother in that family unit. And the same on your father's side. Those aunts and uncles all have different terminology, and it depends on whether or not they're older or younger than your father. Right. And it goes so on and so forth. Yeah. And so when I'm at family gatherings in China, anyone ever listens to this, my wife is Chinese, so when I'm in China and at a family gathering, yeah, that's true. Yeah, Chinese wives. There's oftentimes arguments if you have this really distant relative. It's like, grandma's sister's cousin's daughter's nephew.
Right.
And people will start trying to figure out what specifically would that person be called. And I think that aspect of the language puts an extreme importance on the family unit and the connection between people, because just from the language you speak, I know exactly when you say someone's title, not their actual name, but who they are, your uncle.
Right.
If they're on your father's side, your mother's side.
Right.
I know if they're older than your father or younger than your father. I know if they're the eldest, the second, the third, the fourth, because they'll be numbered. So I know exactly who they are at the moment you say who it is.
But it's built in.
And it's built into the language.
Yeah.
So that language component is also we see in the culture. Obviously, most East Asian societies have a much heavier emphasis on the family unit than they do the individual. And to go back previously to a term we talked about earlier, which is 撒娇, because we never explained it. In case anyone does listen to this, they might say,
"Well,
you
said whiny is the
wine,
word,
right?"
Yeah.
But we could explain what it is and why wine would not be an accurate translation, right?
But you have to describe examples. You have to describe it.
So 撒娇 is a concept in China. It is a term to describe an action usually taken by a female. Obviously, could be male, could be anyone. And it's this sort of whining, almost subservient attitude, right? That you need help, that you need assistance. Like, oh, Luke, can you help me?
Of course, Kevin. Anything for you, Kevin.
Could you open this for me?
I will, absolutely. I will come to Colorado, and I will open it for you. Yes, Kevin. Anything you like.
And
you do a great 撒娇, by the way. Your 撒娇 is dynamite.
Yes, thank you. To most Western people, we see that as being childish. We see it as being dependent. You're not able to do this on your own. You're relying on someone else. Weak. Things like this. And obviously this is stereotyping. Not everyone has the same point of view. We do have people that act like this in the States.
Yeah.
We have that act like it over there that like this. There's many viewpoints, okay? But usually, or oftentimes in China, that is seen as being somewhat attractive. If my significant other is acting like that to me, especially me being a male, I might feel empowered, like, aha, I opened the jar for you. Look at me,
exactly.
A big, strong man. And so that, to some people, is a characteristic that you look for in a partner.
Yeah.
And even though you both know it's sort of an act, it's not necessarily genuine. It's very, very common. Anyone that's been to China and spent a good amount of time there and are able to see local people going about their daily lives, if you're able to see couples sort of interacting while they're dating, in that sort of courtship period, you'll oftentimes see girls doing that. One of the most common things you see in China is men carrying a woman's purse.
Right.
That's usually considered very, very polite. My, girlfriend, wife, or significant other, partner has a bag. She says, "Oh, it's too heavy. I carry it for her."
In America, we might say in America, just carry it yourself. What's wrong with you?
Right. And me being in China for as long as I was, obviously I would run into many Western individuals that would be in relationships with people from China, and this instance would come up and they'd say, "No, I'm not carrying it for you. Carry your own bag. Don't put so much stuff in your bag." Right. Well, there is a lack of understanding of, it's not that this person can't carry it. It's that, and this would get into the whole concept of face, which we don't have. To some extent, they're giving you face by saying that they can't carry it. They're not strong enough. You're better. You have the ability to do it. Please carry it for me. And I'm giving you face by agreeing to do this for you, even though I might feel it's socially humiliating to have a giant pink bag. So there's a lot of different concepts here.
There's so much going on there, and so it's like a subtext that is being signaled, right? There's a subtext, and the subtext is, I need an instance of validation that our relationship is moving forward, or there is some sacrifice there, or there is you are in it more than just being another human being standing beside me, and that's the subtext. And then the signal is the 撒娇, that behavior, and then the response to it, the appropriate response to it. So it's almost like a bird courtship ritual where a bower bird builds its den and has all the berries and stuff arranged in just such a way, and then a female comes along and looks at it. Why does that have to exist? Well, there is there is a subtext there. There's a reason for it, and it takes on many forms. And we have analogous forms of that in the United States as well. It just looks different, but I think the subtext is the same. Basically, the subtext is there has to be some validation that me investing my time in this person is being returned by that person. They're investing their time in me, and I think that it's sort of like saying, testing the air and seeing which direction the wind is blowing. It's a way to get a feel for where you stand and see if it's worth continuing. I don't even know if people. I don't think people do that consciously. I don't think they're thinking about that, but I think that's what it basically is.
Sometimes they do. If you wanted to break it down to that simple of a subtext, sure, we could. And we could break down all of these things to something simple. If we went back to a term we talked about earlier, 关系, networking, relationships. Done, right? I mean, we have that in the United States. They have that in China. But there is such a different emphasis on 关系 and how you go about it and how important it is and how to build it, that even though the subtext may be the same, culturally, it's very, very different. So my perspective as someone growing up in this culture versus this culture of the world around me is going to be vastly different, even though the subtext may be the same or similar.
Right.
So a lot of these things, sure, you could break them down. We do have them universally in all cultures. Basically, any sort of experience we have is universal across the human race. But it's the emphasis that we put on them and how to go about them that makes them culturally unique and will influence us in our development as humans and with our minds as to how we see the world.
Right. So it's that sort of slightly higher level above the basic subtext that varies from culture to culture. That's the thing that opens up when you travel or you meet somebody or learn about another culture or experience another culture. It's that opens up your mind to other possibilities of seeing the world. And I think there are lots of examples like that aren't even cultural, but that are era based. I think we could go into a completely new discussion if we had the time for it. I think we could also go into a discussion on what that looks like in different periods of time, because even a few hundred years ago, when timepieces were a rare commodity, I think the first ones were coming up in among Dutch traders. Right, they were the first ones to come up with to really reliably use reliable timepieces. What did it feel like to live a day back then? And I'm I'm interested in that, because that's kind of the same thing. Yeah, okay, culturally, you open up your mind to this new mental space of this way of interacting called sajiao, where the emphasis on how the relationship develops is completely different than anything I've ever thought about before in the United States. What would it be like if you had lived 30 years and day and night to you was the unit of time, and you kind of judged or had a general picture of when events would happen and how you would coincide with other people would depend on signals from your environment. As soon as you buy your first pocket watch, or you have a timekeeper walking up to you and you pay them a little money to tell you the time, which I think was the first version of watches. You had people like just mulling about, and they would be dressed in a certain way, and you knew they were timekeepers, or maybe they had one of those things. What would that be like to suddenly have a new awareness of time, and you know exactly what time it is anytime you want? How would your picture of reality change?
Yeah. So it's environment. Your environment helps shape who you are as a person. Nature versus nurture. I think we can all agree that both nature and nurture have an effect in who you are. It doesn't matter if your environment is culturally different, geographically different. It doesn't matter if the time period in which you exist is different. It could be your upbringing. We could live right next door to each other on the same street, in the same town, in the same place, but because of what is happening around us, who our parents are, who our family is, how our upbringing, it's going to change our view of the world, our perspective vastly. So yes, culture is definitely a factor. the time period in which you're around is a huge factor. I mean, we can see it simply with ideas of trends, or what the style of dress, the way people act, the way people speak, what was considered politically correct, what was considered normal, what was considered right or wrong. These things change greatly over time and across geographical or cultural space. So basically, any environment in which you exist is going to help shape you as a human.
I think it'll be interesting to see how people who were born not having cell phones in their hands all the time will, and I'm not saying it's a negative or positive, I have no idea. I think it will be interesting to see what the norms are when those people are adults.
It'll definitely be different.
Yeah.
I mean, the norms change from generation to generation.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
So
the zeitgeist is constantly moving.
yes, definitely.
All right. Well, yeah. Kevin, it's been fun chatting. I appreciate the conversation.
Very much so.
We've moved through a lot of mental space.
Yes, a lot of mental space, a lot of varying topics.
Indeed.
And a lot of sort of random ramblings.
Indeed. Well, thanks for the conversation. We'll have to do another one soon.
Fun. We will.
All right.
All right, man. Take care.
You too.